Hi, I'm Linda Mal, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the San Antonio Museum of Art, and our interviewer, Casey Schanbaum, speaks with curator Dr. Emily Sano about the exhibition Heaven and Hell, Salvation and Retribution in Pure Land Buddhism. Now for Art This Week.
Hi, we're at the San Antonio Museum of Art to talk to Dr. Emily Sano, who's the curator of Heaven and Hell, Salvation and Retribution in Pure Land Buddhism. Thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you, Casey.
So I thought it would be important, before we delve into individual pieces, to give a little bit of a background on what Pure Land Buddhism is and why it spawned all of this rich, amazing art.
Thank you. Pure Land Buddhism is the faith that was established by the belief in a Buddha called Amitabha, the Buddha of the Western Paradise. Amitabha, when he became a Buddha, vowed to offer salvation to anybody, to absolutely anybody. And that belief then spawned a great, rich tradition of art that has spread from far west India, areas that are now Afghanistan and Pakistan, all the way across Central Asia, China, into Tibet, Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. And Pure Land, because of this belief that Amitabha could offer salvation for anyone who called upon his name, became, of course, very popular for the ease of reaching paradise after death.
Yeah, you didn't have to be a monk. It's available to anybody.
You did not have to be a monk. Other versions of Buddhism require that you be a monk, that you devote your life to it. You don't live a regular civil existence. Instead, you're completely aligned to the church. So this was a very broad appeal to everyone in existence. So it was really popular for that reason.
I thought it would be important to talk about the original historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, and just about the various representations in art, but specific to this exhibit as well. If you could tell us about that.
Thank you. Yes, the Buddha Shakyamuni, of course, was the historical Buddha, the man who actually lived and died in India in the 6th century BC and established the religion. He was a prince originally who encountered old age, sickness, poverty, and death. And he felt very keenly that people should not have to go through that. And so he wanted to find some way of allowing human beings to reach a different level of existence. And that was so important at the time because there were so many different theories about mankind, different religions being practiced at the time. But fundamental to India was the belief in karma, the fact that what the actions of one lifetime affected his future. And so in order to break this cycle of death, rebirth, and reincarnation, this was the cycle that Indians believed that everyone went through. He devised this method of securing a much higher existence level. And he himself did this by meditating, going through austerities. There's a wonderful piece in the show, The Meditating Buddha from Birmingham, that shows him in this emaciated form, meditating as he did under a Bodhi tree, where he gained enlightenment. And so he became a teacher. He wandered North India, gathered followers, and then upon his death was taken into heaven as he passed into nirvana. And there's a wonderful painting, 2 paintings actually, that describe that moment of his passing. And those ideas of his meditation under the Bodhi tree, as well as his parinirvana, his entrance into nirvana, were very important works of art that passed all the way across Asia and has stayed with all Buddhist believers. Amitabha himself recognized this. They were very close in compatriots, and Amitabha himself had his own environment, his own heaven that came with what are called bodhisattvas. And these bodhisattvas were individuals who had reached enlightenment but decided to stay on earth just to help human beings. So they became extremely popular with the populations that Buddhism went through. They became in some ways even more highly worshipped than the Buddha himself because of the compassion, and that appealed so strongly to people. And then there are also disciples of the Buddha called arhats, and they too were vowed to protect Buddhist law, and they too were teachers and leaders of Buddhist faith.
With Pure Land Buddhism, it does seem like there's a focus on the faith and the salvation offered through Amitabha. Can you talk about Amitabha's role specifically in the life cycle and how followers would look to him for salvation?
Yes, thank you, Casey. The Amitabha was, of course, treated with much respect and devotion, and images of Amitabha grew up in all of these Asian countries. We even have a piece from Central Asia, a little iron plaque that shows Amitabha from the 8th century in Central Asia, all the way to Japan. And these figures of Amitabha were carried and rested with the deceased on the deathbed. And Amitabha was the Buddha that one visualized when nearing death. In some cases, Amitabha even had strands of colored string attached to images on paintings and sculptures that sat nearby, and a devotee would hold those, expecting to be pulled into paradise. So then Amitabha comes down from heaven to greet the believer and to carry the soul of the believer to paradise personally. And so that is the beauty of the belief in Amitabha.
Well, and it gives it such a beautiful visualization for something that is so metaphysical.
Metaphysical entirely, yes.
When talking about the two bodhisattvas that accompany Amitabha, Avalokiteshvara specifically seems to have a lot of varieties of representation. Can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yes, because Avalokiteshvara was so popular, indeed there are many, many representations across time. Amitabha could be a very stern-looking bodhisattva. It can be a very gracious, in a feminine form. Avalokiteshvara is the one deity who takes on a feminine aspect, actually, and that's mainly because of the reputation for compassion and the fact that she protects, sailors at sea and warriors on the battlefield and women and children. I mean, all of that is included. So the power of Amitabha then was sometimes expressed with multiple heads and multiple arms, because that was a physical representation of the multiplicity of powers this deity had. And it's that sense of being all-seeing, all-encompassing, and with many, many avenues to help that created the popularity of this deity.
And multiple points of access for the common person.
Yes, multiple points of access.
I thought it would be helpful if you could tell us a little bit about Ojo Yoshu, which it was very important for followers, but it also saw a rise in the popularity of hell scenes, which there are gorgeous ones throughout this exhibit, so I thought it would be helpful to know a little bit about that.
Thank you. Well, the Ojo Yoshu was a document, it's called The Essentials Necessary to Salvation, and it was a document that was written by a Japanese monk in the 10th century. He describes the whole ritual of visualization upon death, and the idea of devoting oneself to Amitabha and repeating his name in order to reach this salvation. And he also then described the flip side of the coin, that if one didn't go to this effort of being saved by Amitabha, the result was hell. And all individuals then were going to go into hell to be judged by a series of 10 kings. And this whole idea of the 10 kings, which is celebrated in this exhibit, comes from China as a theory that they developed, the 8th century Chinese developed following a system of judgment that was their actual legal system at the time. And so the Ojo Yoshu describes in details the various painful tortures and events that occur in hell. And it was, of course, to try to frighten people into living well. But the wonderful thing about Buddhist hell is that it doesn't last forever, and unlike a Christian hell, and there are means of getting out of it, and one way is to appeal to various savior deities. This can be the monk Jizo, it can be Avalokiteshvara, or it can even then be one of the kings of hell, who people begin to look at as, you know, hey, boss man, you know, cut me a little slack sort of idea, you see. And so leniency was granted.
There are so many great representations of Enma-O, which is one of the, I believe, the 5th king?
The 5th king of hell, who became the major figure representing the hell kings.
So it's interesting to see the different depictions of him and his fury and his judgment, but then also in a lot of these hell scenes you have Jizo, who is willing to even go down in the depths of hell and offer salvation.
Offer salvation, right.
So that's it's a gruesome scene, but then there's the hope for salvation within it.
Exactly.
So it's very interesting.
The DMA conservator who worked on stabilizing the sculpture for the show said that she worked with him for 6 weeks, and she found him to be very fair. She worked every day with him. And so it's a very special deity, yes, with very special attributes.
So I have to say, one of my favorite parts of the exhibition are the hell robes and hell courtesans.
Oh, thank you.
Can you talk about the role that they would have had for followers of Pure Land Buddhism, and kind of how they aided their, I guess, religious development?
Thank you, thank you. Yes, the hell courtesan developed partially out of the rise of literacy in Japan and the fact that woodblock printing made possible documents like the Ojo Yoshu that went around that people could actually read themselves. A major legend that occurred was about a 5th century monk, a real monk named Ikkyu, who was quite an eccentric, and he took his mission of proselytizing even to the brothels, which he liked to frequent. He met a courtesan who wore this robe, an outer robe that was covered with scenes of hell, because she, being a prostitute, felt that this was her fate. But he led her through meditation and through teaching her about charity and good works to reach a moment of enlightenment when she was able to shed her robe. And this story became very popular in Japan because it showed that even the worst sinner can be saved. So it was a very far-reaching kind of development at a rather popular level that inspired also, theater, games, and made the whole concept of hell so much more understandable and even fun.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it when, as an EQ,
Yes.
he's dancing on the skeleton and the
dancing
skull.
with skeletons.
Yeah.
Yes, at her moment of enlightenment, she's entertaining him in the brothel, but she leaves the room, comes back, and finds him dancing with skeletons, which meant to her the realization that we're all flesh, we all become skeletons in the end. Beauty is only skin deep.
Yeah.
And that was a tremendous moment, and it is illustrated with paintings in the show.
It's a great work. And we kind of touched on it a little bit with Rygo, I'm sorry, and the descent. And I found it interesting that there's so many different representations of Rygo.
Yes.
There's one with the mountains. So could you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, the most typical Rygo painting shows the Buddha Amida, or Amitabha, coming down from heaven, actually literally descending on clouds, coming down from heaven with an entourage of 25 music-making bodhisattva. Now this is an iconography that got established in Japan in the mid-11th century in a temple that still exists today in sculptural form, a beautiful Amida Buddha, and surrounding him these bodhisattvas that are carved and attached to the walls, each playing a musical instrument. So that beautiful scene is represented in paintings here in the show. There's also the form of what is called Amitabha coming down, rising above the mountains, so that if you can imagine this, person on his deathbed has this painting there, and can imagine that Amitabha is coming down, but becomes visible to him as he rises above a mountain range. And that mountain range, of course, is what is very common in Japan. There are lots of little mountains. So there they appear. It's Amitabha Buddha and two of the bodhisattvas, the primary ones, one being Avalokiteshvara, who carries a lotus pedestal for the soul to jump onto and be transported to heaven. So it's such a beautiful idea.
Very beautiful. So why did you feel that it was important to bring this exhibition and the practices and stories that it tells to San Antonio?
Well, first of all, I wanted to call attention to the fantastic works of art that the San Antonio Museum of Art holds in Buddhist material. Secondly, though, there have been relatively few shows about Buddhism in the state of Texas. The Kimball has had one or two. I know there's been something in Houston, but there's never been anything that was devoted to Pure Land. And I thought it was really important for the residents of this area to be introduced basically to major Buddhist concepts, which they would have been very unfamiliar with, and to give them an avenue into understanding one form of the religion that I think could be quite enlightening to them about what this faith, which is still popular today in Asia and probably spreading into the United States, would be about. So it was a major opportunity to present beautiful works of art that people have never seen before to this part of Texas.
Well, aside from it being just aesthetically beautiful, it is absolutely a learning experience, and I encourage anybody to come to San Antonio Museum of Art. The photos just don't do it justice. There's so much fine detail to see, so be sure to check it out. Thank you so much for your time.
Casey,
I really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
We want to thank Dr. Sano for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to samuseum.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.